The morning began like any other for 23-year-old medical student, Emily Carter. Her eyes opened to the soft light filtering through her apartment blinds. It was supposed to be a simple flight, a 2-hour trip across the Pacific to visit her parents after months of internship work. Nothing special, nothing risky. Outside, the city was still waking up. The hum of early traffic, the smell of fresh coffee, and the faint sound of waves from the nearby coast filled the air. She took one last look around her small apartment. The unmade bed, the textbooks piled on the desk, the photo of her parents smiling by the ocean. And smiled. She had no idea it would be the last time she'd see any of it again. By 8:15 a.m., Emily arrived at the airport. The air smelled faintly of jet fuel and rain. The sky was overcast but calm, a light gray that promised an easy flight. Flight Ocean Air 1-62 was a mid-sized twin-engine jet carrying 84 passengers and 6 crew members. Families, tourists, and business travelers filled the cabin with casual chatter. The atmosphere was peaceful, even cheerful. Emily found her seat by the window, seat 17A, her favorite spot. She placed her backpack under the seat and pulled out a small paperback novel. The engines hummed to life, and the plane began to taxi toward the runway. As the aircraft lifted off the ground, Emily looked out the window. The city skyline shrank beneath her, replaced by endless stretches of deep blue ocean. White clouds drifted lazily across the sky. For the first hour, everything was smooth. The seatbelt light was off. The attendants served drinks, and the pilot's calm voice occasionally came over the intercom to announce their progress. Passengers chatted, children laughed, and Emily lost herself in her book. But at 9:46 a.m., the calm began to break. The first sign came as a soft vibration, subtle but noticeable. The overhead compartments rattled faintly. Some passengers looked around, confused. Moments later, a dull thud echoed through the cabin. The plane jolted once, then steadied. A few nervous laughs rippled through the seats. Emily looked out the window. The sky was darker now. Gray clouds were gathering fast, stretching across the horizon. Lightning flickered in the distance, silent, distant, but unmistakable. The captain's voice came over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're encountering some unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts." The cheerful chatter vanished. The cabin grew quiet except for the soft whine of the engines. Emily tightened her belt and gripped the armrest. The book lay forgotten on her lap. Within minutes, the turbulence worsened. The aircraft shuddered violently, the overhead bins rattling louder. Drinks spilled, passengers gasped, and the smell of coffee and fear filled the air. The ocean below was now invisible, swallowed by thick gray clouds and sheets of rain. Lightning flashed so close it lit up the cabin in white. For several tense minutes, the plane pitched and rolled. The engines roared, straining against the wind. Oxygen masks dropped suddenly from the ceiling with a mechanical snap. Screams erupted throughout the cabin. Emily's heart raced as she pulled her mask on, her trembling hands barely able to hold it in place. The aircraft was losing altitude. The overhead lights flickered, then went dark for a moment before emergency lights kicked in dim, red, and ominous. Through the window, flashes of ocean appeared, rising fast toward them. The pilot's voice came through the static-filled intercom. "Brace for impact!" The words sliced through the chaos. At 10:07 a.m., Ocean Air 162 struck the surface of the Pacific Ocean. The sound was deafening, metal twisting, glass shattering, and a deep, monstrous roar as the fuselage tore apart. The cabin exploded into chaos as water rushed in from all sides. Emily was thrown forward, her seatbelt cutting into her chest. She hit her head against the seat in front, the world blurring into a mix of noise and darkness. When she regained consciousness seconds later, the cabin was tilted sharply downward. Water surged through the aisles, pulling everything toward the rear of the aircraft. Passengers screamed, debris floated, and luggage crashed from the overhead bins. She unbuckled herself and fought against the current. The cold was unbearable, sharp and breath-stealing. The aircraft's metal groaned as if alive, and then came the sound she'd never forget. The final snap as the fuselage broke apart. Suddenly, she was outside, thrown into the open ocean. The surface exploded around her in white foam and burning debris. The tail of the plane was sinking fast, a wall of metal vanishing beneath waves. Rain lashed her face as she gasped for air. Everywhere she looked, there were fragments of the plane, floating seats, luggage, shattered metal, and people calling for help. The waves were relentless, tossing her between fragments of wreckage. The smell of fuel filled the air. She tried to grab onto a floating seat cushion but slipped. Panic surged, but adrenaline kept her moving. Through the mist and chaos, she spotted a piece of the wing still floating. It was large enough to hold her weight. Kicking hard, she reached it and climbed on, her hands shaking violently. The sky above was black now. Thunder rolled. There was no sign of land, only endless gray waves stretching in every direction. She screamed for help, but the sound was swallowed by the wind. Then she saw it, fire on the horizon. The rest of the plane, sinking. It was over. And she was alone. Time began to lose meaning. Minutes felt like hours. The rain poured without mercy, stinging her skin. Her clothes clung heavy with seawater and jet fuel. Her mind replayed the crash over and over. The noise, the fear, the faces. She didn't know who had survived or if rescue was even possible. But one thing was clear. If she stopped fighting now, she'd die out there. So she held on to the broken wing, bruised, bleeding, freezing, and stared into the endless ocean. Somewhere beyond the clouds, the sun was rising. And for Emily Carter, the real battle had just begun. The ocean was merciless. Each wave struck with the force of a wall, throwing Emily off balance as she clung desperately to the fragment of the plane's wing. Her body trembled violently from the cold. The salty wind burned her eyes and lips. The remains of Ocean Air 162 drifted miles apart. Bits of luggage, floating seat cushions, and twisted metal bobbed in the relentless waves. Smoke still rose from a patch of burning fuel on the surface, turning the air thick and acrid. Emily could barely see beyond a few meters. The storm clouds had descended, turning the morning into an eerie twilight. Rain hammered down, stinging her face. For a while, she didn't move. Her mind couldn't process what had just happened. One moment, she was reading a book in seat 17A. The next, she was alone in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Then instinct took over. She had to survive. Her first task was simple: stay afloat. The broken section of wing she clung to was slippery, but it held air inside, keeping her partially above water. She adjusted her position carefully, wrapping her arms around the metal edge to reduce her energy loss. Every movement sent pain shooting through her muscles. Her right shoulder felt dislocated, and small cuts from shattered glass burned under the salt water. She tried to recall everything she had ever read about survival at sea. Stay calm. Don't waste energy. Conserve heat. But calmness was impossible when death surrounded her. The waves rose higher, crashing over her again and again, forcing her to choke and gasp. She coughed up seawater and fuel, tasting metal and salt. Every breath was a fight. She whispered a silent thought to herself. Not a prayer, but a promise. I will not die here. As the storm shifted, the thunder faded into the distance. What replaced it was a haunting silence. Only the sound of water slapping against metal and her own ragged breathing. Emily scanned the horizon. Nothing but endless gray. No ships, no islands, no planes. Then, a faint sound. A voice. She turned sharply. Somewhere among the waves, she thought she heard someone calling. Her heart pounded. "Hello?" she screamed, though her voice was swallowed instantly by the wind. She looked again, a dark shape floating far away. It could have been a person, or just wreckage. The sea toyed with her hope, showing flashes of shadow between the waves. She tried to paddle toward it, kicking weakly with her legs, but every stroke drained her strength. The object drifted farther, then vanished behind a cresting wave. And with that, the realization hit her harder than any storm. She might be the only survivor. Hours passed. The rain stopped, but the ocean remained restless. The clouds thinned slightly, revealing a pale afternoon sky. Emily's fingers had gone completely numb. Her lips were blue. The cold water was drawing heat from her body faster than she could generate it. She knew the signs of hypothermia: slow thoughts, shivering, confusion. She forced herself to focus. She began to talk to herself quietly, repeating facts, names, numbers, anything to keep her mind alert. Seat 17A, Ocean Air 162. Coordinates! But she didn't know their last position. The navigation system had failed before the crash. The ocean could have carried her anywhere. She reached into her jacket pocket. Miraculously, her small waterproof phone case was still there. But inside, the phone was cracked and dead. No signal, no power, no help. Her throat was raw from salt water, her skin blistered from the mix of cold and fuel. The smell of burning jet fuel still lingered faintly, a cruel reminder of how close she had come to death. By late afternoon, the storm had passed completely. The sea began to calm, the surface now a vast mirror reflecting the clouds above. The sudden quiet was surreal. Emily looked up. For the first time in hours, she saw sunlight breaking through, warm, golden and far too distant to help. She lay back slightly on the floating debris, letting her body rest. Her eyelids felt heavy. The exhaustion was overwhelming, but she knew sleep could mean death. Somewhere in her foggy mind, she began to recall the survival training video she'd once watched during a volunteer camp. Something about drifting with currents instead of fighting them. If she could stay afloat until nightfall, perhaps rescue would come. Air traffic control must have lost contact with the plane. They would send search teams. They had to. She focused on breathing slowly, counting seconds. The minutes dragged endlessly. Around what felt like sunset, she spotted movement again, small, fast, and close to the water's surface. At first, panic gripped her. Sharks. But as the movement neared, she saw fins slicing through the water. Dolphins. 2 of them swimming side by side. For a strange moment, she felt something almost like comfort. The creatures circled her debris for a few seconds. Curious, then disappeared into the distance. The ocean was vast and silent again. But their brief presence reminded her of one thing. She was still alive in a living world. Darkness came quickly. The sky turned a deep purple, then black. Stars began to emerge one by one. The beauty of it would have been breathtaking, if not for the fear crawling in her chest. The ocean at night was a different world. The water was colder, heavier. Every small splash made her heart race. She wrapped her arms tighter around the wing and kept her head above water. Her mind drifted between exhaustion and alertness, between despair and determination. The world was nothing but black water and cold air. The moon hid behind thick clouds, leaving only faint glimmers of light dancing on the restless waves. Every sound felt louder. The slow slap of water against metal, the occasional creak of the wreckage, the whisper of wind brushing over the sea. Emily Carter's body was numb. Her arms ached, her fingers refused to move, and her skin had turned pale blue beneath the moonlight. But she held on, her cheek pressed against the slick surface of the floating wing fragment that had become her only refuge. Each wave rocked her gently like a cruel lullaby. Sleep tugged at her mind. But deep down she knew, if she closed her eyes, she wouldn't open them again. So she kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, searching for light. Any light. Hours passed. Her thoughts became hazy. The boundary between reality and memory began to blur. Images flickered in her mind, her parents waving at the airport, her best friend's laughter, her graduation photo. She tried to hold on to them, but they slipped away, swallowed by the cold and exhaustion. Her body shivered uncontrollably now. She could barely feel her legs. At one point, she thought she heard voices, distant, echoing across the water. She lifted her head weakly, scanning the darkness. Nothing, just the sea whispering back. Then she thought she saw light, faint, red, and flickering. Her heart leaped. A rescue flare? A ship? She blinked hard, trying to focus. But when she looked again, it was gone. It hadn't been real, just her fading mind playing tricks. She bit her lip to stay awake. Pain was her anchor to life. Time became meaningless. She had no idea how many hours had passed since the crash, maybe 6, maybe 10. The stars shifted overhead, indifferent to her suffering. Then, far off in the distance, she heard something new, a low humming sound. Her head jerked up. The sound grew louder. It wasn't the ocean. It wasn't thunder. It was rotors, a helicopter. Her heart raced. She screamed with every ounce of strength left in her lungs, waving one arm desperately. "I'm here!" Her voice cracked and disappeared into the wind. She saw the faint beam of a searchlight sweeping across the ocean surface. Far away, too far. She waved again, splashing water, crying out, "Please!" But the light turned, sweeping the opposite direction. the sound grew fainter, and then silence again. Her scream broke into sobs that the waves quickly drowned. She lowered her head, tears mixing with seawater. She had been so close. By the time the first faint light of dawn touched the horizon, Emily's body was on the edge of collapse. Her arms no longer felt like they belonged to her. Her head throbbed. Her breathing came in shallow gasps, but she was still alive. The storm had passed completely. The ocean was now eerily calm, the waves softer, the water glassy and endless. The clouds parted to reveal a pale orange sky. She turned her head weakly toward the rising sun. Its warmth was faint but real, the first thing that didn't hurt. Her lips cracked into a trembling smile. Morning. She had survived the night. But the danger wasn't over. The calm sea hid new threats: dehydration, exhaustion, and the sun's brutal heat. The ocean gives and takes. As the sunlight strengthened, she began to see more wreckage scattered across the water, parts of the fuselage, torn seats, and even a life vest drifting nearby. She gathered what little strength she had and paddled toward it, each movement slow and painful. The vest was half torn but still usable. With shaking hands, she slipped it on. It gave her a strange sense of safety, a fragile barrier between her and the deep unknown below. She glanced down into the water, crystal clear under the morning light. Shadows moved beneath the surface, slow and graceful. At first, she thought it was her imagination. But then the shadows grew closer. Sharks. Her pulse quickened. She froze completely, her body trembling. The sleek gray shapes circled beneath her debris, curious but calm. They didn't attack, not yet. She stayed still, barely breathing. Minutes felt like hours as they glided silently below, then disappeared into the depths. She exhaled shakily, tears rolling down her face. "Not today," she whispered weakly to herself. As the sun climbed higher, the world became blindingly bright. The ocean shimmered like liquid fire. The heat pressed down, making it hard to breathe. Emily's skin burned under the sunlight. Her lips were cracked and swollen. The salt water stung her wounds with every wave. She looked around again. Still no ships, no planes, no sign of rescue. The loneliness hit her harder than anything else. The ocean stretched forever, vast and silent, as if she were the only person left on Earth. Her mind drifted in and out of focus. Sometimes she thought she saw movement on the horizon, or heard a voice calling her name, but each time it faded away. It was as if the sea itself was testing her, pushing her to the edge to see if she'd let go. But even in her weakest moment, something deep inside refused to give up. By the time the sun began to set again, the sky turned into a masterpiece of orange and pink, the waves glowing like molten glass. It should have been beautiful, but to Emily it looked like time running out. She was now more than 12 hours since the crash. Every second hurt. Every breath was a struggle. But she had survived the storm, the night, and the sharks. Now, as the sun dipped lower, she whispered inside her mind, "Just one more night. Hold on, someone will come." She rested her head against the wreckage, her eyelids heavy, her heartbeat slow. The ocean rocked her gently once more. And for the first time in a long while, she let her eyes close, not in surrender, but in fragile hope. Above her, a faint light appeared in the sky. Not a star, but a distant blinking red signal. It was a search helicopter, coming back. The morning sun was already blazing across the water when Emily's eyes fluttered open. Her body felt like it didn't belong to her anymore. Her lips were cracked, her throat burned, and her hands clung weakly to the edge of the debris that had kept her alive. For a moment, she didn't know if she was awake or dreaming. The ocean was calm, eerily calm, and the only sounds were the gentle ripples against the metal and the faint cries of seabirds overhead. Then she heard it. A low, distant hum. At first, she thought it was the wind again, or her mind playing tricks. But the sound grew louder, a deep rhythmic thumping echoing across the waves. She forced her head up, squinting into the bright horizon. And then she saw it, a small black shape moving through the sky, sunlight glinting off its rotor blades. A helicopter. Her heart leapt. She tried to shout, but her voice was gone. All that came out was a broken whisper. Desperation surged through her veins. She lifted her arm, trembling, weak but determined, and waved it wildly. Then she grabbed a piece of mirror-like metal from the wreckage and tilted it toward the sun, flashing it toward the helicopter. Inside that helicopter, 2 Coast Guard rescuers scanned the water below. They had already been flying for hours, searching for survivors from the missing flight. One of them caught a glimmer, a small flash of light reflecting off the water. He leaned forward, shouting into his headset. "Wait, go back! I saw something!" The pilot turned sharply, circling lower. The searchlight swept across the sea and then locked onto her. There she was, a single figure clinging to a broken piece of the plane, surrounded by miles of endless water. The rescuer's voice cracked through the radio. "We've got one! She's alive!" The helicopter hovered just above the waves, wind from its blades whipping up salt spray around her. The rescue diver leapt out, cutting through the water like a blade. Emily could barely keep her eyes open now. Everything felt distant and hazy, like a dream she might wake from at any moment. She saw the figure swimming toward her. Black suit, yellow helmet, and then felt a strong arm wrap around her shoulders. "You're safe now!" the diver shouted over the roar of the rotors. She didn't respond, just nodded weakly. The rescuer secured her into the harness, gave a signal, and within seconds both of them were being lifted into the air. The moment her feet left the water, her body went limp. The cold sea that had been her enemy and her protector was finally behind her. When she opened her eyes again, everything was white. White sheets, white ceiling. The steady beep of a heart monitor filled the room. She blinked slowly, confusion clouding her mind until she realized where she was. A hospital. Her lips trembled. "I made it," she whispered hoarsely. By the time the first faint light of dawn touched the horizon, Emily's body was on the edge of collapse. Her arms no longer felt like they belonged to her. Her head throbbed. Her breathing came in shallow gasps, but she was still alive. The storm had passed completely. The ocean was now eerily calm, the waves softer, the water glassy and endless. The clouds parted to reveal a pale orange sky. She turned her head weakly toward the rising sun. Its warmth was faint but real, the first thing that didn't hurt. Her lips cracked into a trembling smile. Morning. She had survived the night. But the danger wasn't over. The calm sea hid new threats: dehydration, exhaustion, and the sun's brutal heat. The ocean gives and takes. As the sunlight strengthened, she began to see more wreckage scattered across the water, parts of the fuselage, torn seats, and even a life vest drifting nearby. She gathered what little strength she had and paddled toward it, each movement slow and painful. The vest was half torn but still usable. With shaking hands, she slipped it on. It gave her a strange sense of safety, a fragile barrier between her and the deep unknown below. She glanced down into the water, crystal clear under the morning light. Shadows moved beneath the surface, slow and graceful. At first, she thought it was her imagination. But then the shadows grew closer. Sharks. Her pulse quickened. She froze completely, her body trembling. The sleek gray shapes circled beneath her debris, curious but calm. They didn't attack, not yet. She stayed still, barely breathing. Minutes felt like hours as they glided silently below, then disappeared into the depths. She exhaled shakily, tears rolling down her face. "Not today," she whispered weakly to herself. As the sun climbed higher, the world became blindingly bright. The ocean shimmered like liquid fire. The heat pressed down, making it hard to breathe. Emily's skin burned under the sunlight. Her lips were cracked and swollen. The salt water stung her wounds with every wave. She looked around again. Still no ships, no planes, no sign of rescue. The loneliness hit her harder than anything else. The ocean stretched forever, vast and silent, as if she were the only person left on Earth. Her mind drifted in and out of focus. Sometimes she thought she saw movement on the horizon, or heard a voice calling her name, but each time it faded away. It was as if the sea itself was testing her, pushing her to the edge to see if she'd let go. But even in her weakest moment, something deep inside refused to give up. In an interview, Emily said something that would stay with millions forever. "When you're that close to death, you realize life isn't about control. It's about holding on, even when you have nothing left. The ocean didn't want me, but it gave me back, and I'll never waste that gift." The video fades to a cinematic wide shot of the calm ocean at sunset. The waves glisten with golden light. A single piece of floating wreckage drifts slowly, then disappears beneath the surface. She survived 12 hours in the ocean, A miracle the world will never forget.